At the end of the 19th century, women's roles changed at home, in the workplace, and politically. Women became more independent, fought for their rights, and started to work. However, women faced many challenges along the way. They had to raise and educate their own children, often alone, and work in factories for minimal pay, all the while fighting for their equality.
Historically, women were expected to run the household by educating their children, cooking, and cleaning. However, in the 19th century, women were expected to do all of this while working. As a result, women began to have less children because it was difficult to educate children while working. Particularly in the city, family sizes were decreasing. The more children in the city, the more people to take care of. Couples were also getting married later, and birth control methods were beginning to be used more frequently. Divorces were also prominent as women became more independent. In 1890, the ratio of divorces to marriages was 1 divorce to every 17 marriages. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, a divorcee and the author of Women in Economics, encouraged women to reject dependency and contribute to society on a larger scale. Towards the end of the 19th century, women began following Gilman's model and became more independent.
The late 19th century brought new roles for women in not only the home but also in the workplace. New technology and industries provided new opportunities. Women began to reject femininity and their supposed biological roles and character. As women became more independent, they also became more involved in the economy and politics. Feminists such as the aforementioned Gilman advocated for women in the workplace instead of just at home. Working became a way for women who chose not to marry to support themselves without relying on a husband. Although factory work was a very common job for women, nurseries and kitchens mainly run by women also started to become encouraged and eventually standardized. Women were also found working in new jobs such as the medical field, since the first female doctor, Elizabeth Blackwell, had gotten her degree in 1849. In addition to this, women started inventing and being credited with the invention of essential tools such as the commercial dishwasher, created by Josephine Cochrane in 1886. But the new women workforce came with new challenges. Most women were only paid about 1/2 to 2/3 of what their male counterparts earned while working, and still had to balance their work with their home life, and there was not much they could do about their working conditions and wages without a ballot, so they protested for their right to vote.
Even before the Civil War, women were fighting for the right to vote. Many women activists fought for African American rights during the Civil War as well. Unfortunately, when African American men received the right to vote after the Civil War, women were left without a vote. So, women began to fight for their rights on a larger scale. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony were among the women who formed the National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1890. However, Stanton and Anthony were getting older and could no longer spearhead the movement for women. So, Carrie Chapman Catt became one of the most prominent leaders for women's rights. She stressed that women need the right to vote because they were responsible for education of their children and needed a say on matters like school boards. Women were soon allowed to vote in local elections, and by 1920, all women could vote. However, women did not only fight for the right to vote. They wanted to be able to own property and receive equal pay while working. Fortunately, by 1890, most states had allowed women to own property after marriage. Women also wanted to restrict the amount of alcohol that their husbands were allowed to drink. Men controlled all of the finances of a family, but were so fond of drinking that they were hardly ever thinking straight. It was also common for men to physically abuse their wives and children. Women wanted the right to vote in order to change the laws to punish men for beating their wives and children. They also wanted to close down or at least restrict the bars that their husbands spent so much time in. Oftentimes, we focus on women who fought for the right to vote, but we forget that women also fought for other injustices that they experienced. In the 19th century, especially, women realized their oppression and started to fight to change the way the world viewed them.
Groups such as the National American Women's Suffrage Association were instrumental in getting women the right to vote, but they often did not fight for all women. Women of color were usually excluded and alienated from these groups, even though many suffragists had been abolitionists before and during the Civil War. This exclusion was partially due to the 15th Amendment, giving voting rights to all men regardless of race, but not women, which had made many suffragists resentful. Women like Ida B. Wells created their own suffragist groups that focused on issues of women as well as civil rights. Wells was a suffragette and civil rights advocate who was known for educating people about injustices against African Americans, such as lynching, and would sometimes confront white suffragettes who ignored or excluded black women from their campaigns. She helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as well as the National Association of Colored Women's Club. These groups focused on rights for women and people of color. Even though she and other civil rights and suffrage leaders were ridiculed at the time, she is seen as a hero now. She and others in these groups were instrumental in gaining rights for women and people of color.
Women played a huge role in the 19th century. They took over the workplace while taking care of and educating their children while fighting for their rights. Women abandoned their dependency to their spouses, and the divorce rate rose considerably. Women started working, especially in factories. They began creating essential inventions like the dishwasher. Women like Carrie Chapman Catt started fighting for the right to vote, and groups like the National American Women's Suffrage Association formed to get the rights for women that they deserve. As the 19th century came to a close, it was obvious that women in America had come to dominate the time period.